We've been in this series called Keep the Change. And we've been talking about and challenging, really, our understanding of giving. And what does giving look like in our world? And we've been trying to step outside of what you might have expected to hear and really kind of challenge you with a different way of thinking about giving. So the first week, we reminded everybody that every single person has something to give. That generosity is not a luxury reserved for the wealthy, but that every one of you has something to give out of the capital in your life, whether it's relational, spiritual, physical, intellectual, or financial. Everybody has something to give. Last week, we talked about biblical giving and what does biblical giving look like. And the first thing we said was that biblical giving is more about relationships than it is about rules. It's more about relationships. It's not about a percentage, or it's not about pre-tax or post-tax or net or gross or any of those other things. It's not about the rules, but it's about a relationship. That we are to give proportionately out of what we have, not out of what we don't have. And that God is calling us at the end of the day to give from our hearts, not just our wallets. That at the end of the day, giving is an act that I get to do, not something I have to do. Today I want to talk about how giving changes me. I'll be in Proverbs chapter 11, verses 23 through 28. If you want to follow along in your Bibles with me, we'll have the verses on the screen as well, but I just wanted you to know where we're coming from today. And while you're looking for that, I want to tell you a little bit of a story. When we first publicized this series that we were going to do this, we put it out on Facebook and other ways for people to know it was coming. One of my pastor friends called me and they said, Dave, do you really want to do a sermon series with the word change in the title? And I said, yeah, why? And he said, dude, people hate change. And you live on the west side of Cincinnati. People hate change. And I thought about that. I thought, oh my gosh, that's right. We really do hate change. This last week I was at my doctor. I hadn't been feeling well, and so the doctor suggested that I go a week gluten-free. I went one meal. Wow, that's hard. And I know it's good for me. I know I'm going to feel better. I know it's the right thing to do, but change is hard. My guess is half of you in this room were irritated last night when you had to change your clocks, even though you got an extra hour's sleep, just because it's change, right? And we're terrible at change. You know that old church joke, right? How many church folks does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is change. What's change? Now, I think I have discovered the cure for all of our light bulb issues. Found this on the internet the other night. Check this out. See? So now the answer is, how many church folks does it take to change a light bulb? None. You're all off the hook. You don't have to change it all. Yay, right? Let's all go to Denny's and celebrate. Well, the reality is change is inevitable. Change is happening all the time, everywhere we go, whether we like it or not. And as scary as it can be, it's a reality for our lives. The one constant in life is change. Things change. And we're afraid of change often because it's unknown, it's unfamiliar, it's uncomfortable, it's untested, and we're just afraid of it. We've not been there before. And so we buy into the lie that says better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. And so even though we know change would be good for us, even though we know change is important, even though my doctor tells me, Dave, you've got to make a change, we resist change. Most people don't change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. Well, let me say that again. Some of you might need to write that one down. Most people don't change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. And so because we wait, because we put it off, because we avoid it, we always associate change with pain. Because we wait until pain is the only option. And it's interesting to me, this is especially true in the church. We struggle with change. We really struggle with change. Last week, half of you were at watching the Bengals, and so this room was a little emptier than it is today. And Mike suggested, well, maybe we need to put out less chairs. And immediately I go, oh, you can't change things, right? If you change things, people get upset. So it's even me. But I find it interesting that those of us who call ourselves Jesus followers, those of us who have committed to a life of faith, call ourselves Christians, we struggle with change the most. When everything about faith is change. 100% of faith is about change. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now see, it's all about change. The Bible talks about how when we engage a relationship with Christ, we become a new creation. And so an encounter with Christ is intentionally meant to change our lives for the better. And yet we struggle so much with change. Now, when it comes to our giving, we know our giving changes things. We know if I give something to you, it's going to change you. You will now be someone who has rather than someone who does not have. Giving changes the receiver. Giving also changes the world. We've seen how giving can change the communities in which we live and the tragedies in which we've been focused on. But I got to be honest with you, I'm selfish. Are there any other selfish people in the room? Some of you are, some selfish. Oh, good. There were no selfish people in our first service. I couldn't believe it. None. Or maybe they were too selfish to raise their hand. I don't know. Anyway, I'm selfish. So I want to know what's in this for me, right? I'm glad that if I give, you get blessed. Yay, right? If I give, the world's a better place. Goody. But somewhere deep down in that ugly part of my heart that I try not to let anybody else see, I'm selfish. And I want to know what's in this for me. What's in giving for me? Today I want to share with you that I think there are 3 principles about how giving changes me for the better. And they all come out of Proverbs chapter 11. And the first principle is this: giving changes me from selfish to selfless. From selfish to selfless. A couple of weeks ago at Bible studies, I asked the question, what does sin mean? What is it? What is sin? And somebody said, well, sin is really nothing more than selfishness. It's putting me before you and before God. And I thought to myself, wow, I have a master's degree in theology, and I couldn't name sin better than that. Sin is selfishness. Proverbs 11 says this: the desire of the righteous ends only in good, but the hope of the wicked only in wrath. People curse the one who hoards grain, but they pray God's blessing on the one who is willing to sell. See, here's what giving does. Giving, when I become a giver, it changes the me to the we. Because I have to look outside of myself. We live in this individualistic society that says it's all about you. Get yours. It's all about you yourself. Mind your own business. Stay out of other people's business. It's your politics. It's your faith. It's your life. It's you. And we have lost the concept of we that God created us for. The community in which we were designed to live. The book of Judges is one of my favorite books in the Old Testament. And here's what I want to say about the book of Judges. If you're not really serious about God, do not read the book of Judges because it will fry your brain. There is some crazy stuff that happens in the book of Judges that you'll be like, wait, what? See, Brent, you know what just happened? Half these people are going to go read Judges now. See what I did? See? So in the book of Judges, one of the major themes of the book of Judges, it is just this catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe after disaster. And one of the major themes in the book of Judges is in those days, the people of Israel had no king, and each one did what was right in their own eyes. See, when we live for me, we're headed for disaster. But when we can change the way we think and see the world from me to we, from selfishness to selflessness, it changes everything. Giving does that for us. The second principle that I think giving changes in me is it changes my outlook on life from an outlook of scarcity to an outlook of abundance. From scarcity to abundance. And here's what I mean by that. I think many of us have bought into the wrong idea about giving. We think there is this finite amount of stuff. And we better hold on to it because if we let go of it, it might disappear. We might run out. And so we squeeze harder and harder and tighter, and we gather and we hoard to ourselves in this mentality of scarcity because we might run out. But this is the exact opposite of what Jesus taught. Jesus said, I have come to give you life and life abundantly, full to overflowing, a life that will blow your mind. Proverbs 11 says this, one person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. See, God's economy works differently than ours. God works on an abundance model where we work on a scarcity model. I thought to myself, when did we first begin to see a scarcity model in the Bible? And I thought all the way back to Exodus. Remember the story of Pharaoh and the Jews and slavery and all of that stuff? Remember how they got there? Before any of them were slaves, there was a famine in the land. And everybody came to look for food, and Egypt had food. So for a long time, the Egyptians and the Israelites and everybody else in the world kind of lived together in this harmonious place until one day the Pharaoh said, what if I run out? And that scarcity mindset led to slavery, it led to abuse, it led to genocide and brokenness. It wasn't until about 500 years later that God said, enough is enough. I'm going to remind you who I am. And so God, in God's abundant love and mercy, freed the slaves from Egypt, lavished on them the wealth of Egypt as they left, opened the Red Sea as we sang about earlier today, provided food they'd never seen before in the form of manna, quail from heaven, water from rocks. Everything about that story is about the abundance of God. See, giving changes our perspective. What giving does is it teaches us to open our hands. Because, church, open hands are not just the posture of giving, but open hands are the posture of receiving. We cannot receive God's blessings when our hands are clenched tight around those things we value above God. And so what giving does is it opens our hands for us and reminds us of the abundance of God. It reminds us that we are giving toward something, not giving something away. Somebody said one time that you don't give to Shiloh. So when you fill out your commitment card, I want you to think to yourself, I'm not giving to Shiloh. I'm giving through Shiloh to all that God will do in the world through this church. Abundance, not scarcity. The last principle that I think the book of Proverbs teaches us about our giving and how giving changes us is that giving changes my mentality from impossible to possible. From impossible to possible. When I am living in selfishness and in scarcity, everything is impossible. Everything. This couple of weeks ago, Julie and I got some news that there was a financial obligation that we have that's going to be way bigger than we expected. And got to be honest with you, I'm still standing here today going, come on, God, waiting for a miracle. Right? Right? And I don't know how this is going to work out. It feels impossible to me. It feels impossible to overcome. It feels like a deal breaker, a game changer. But you know what I know? I've been here before. And God has made a way where there was no way. And so I believe in a God who can move things from impossible to possible. Proverbs says this, whoever seeks good finds favor, but evil comes to the one who searches for it. Yesterday, while I was in that line waiting to vote, like I said, people were very chatty. It was very interesting, very far outside my personal comfort zone. But I met a guy who was right in front of me in line. He's here in this, you can see the back of his head in this picture. And he and I were chatting about politics and about systems and about community policing and about taxes and about all this other political stuff. And he was very frustrated and very down and very irritated because he wasn't happy with either of his voting choices, and he was very upset about the whole thing. At the end of the conversation, he said to me, "It's impossible to fix this country. It's impossible to fix this country." You ever get there? You ever get to that impossible place? I have. But again, I was wearing my Shiloh jacket. There's a little voice inside my head that want to go, yeah, I know, right? But see, I know better. I've been here before. I feel his pain. I don't dismiss his frustrations. I agreed with many of them. But I say, you know what? If your hope is in politics or in politicians or in presidents, then you're probably right. You're probably right. There is no hope. Give up now. Let's all go home and just wait. But, somebody say, but. Oh, yeah. But this is where everything changes. I'm going to preach a whole sermon series called But. Tim, youth group. That's a sermon series right there. Anyway, but I know a God who does impossible things. I know a God who does God's best work in cemeteries. I know a God who feeds 5,000 people with a couple of fish and some bread. I know a God who speaks, and it was. I know a God who hangs all the stars in the sky. I know a God who does miracles and is in the miracle business. I know a God who does the impossible. And so there I am in my Shiloh jacket. And I said, hey, man, listen. My hope is in something bigger than politics. It's in God. And I don't want to sound like one of those church people that's got their heads buried in the sand. I get there are issues, and we got to get involved. That's why I'm here voting. But at the end of the day, I know a guy who does impossible things, and his name is Jesus. In Mark chapter 9 is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. This dad has this son who's been sick his whole life. And dads, walk with me in this one. You know, you've been there when your kid has the flu, when your kid is sick. You do anything for them, right? And so this dad, he's been to every doctor. He's been to every healer. He even went to the disciples, and nobody could heal this kid. And so finally, he gets this kid in front of Jesus. Listen to what this dad says. I love this. Dad says, if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. Jesus' first response was, if you can. Wait. Did I just hear you ask the Savior of the world, the Son of God, the Alpha and the Omega, if I can do anything? Jesus says, if you can, everything is possible for the one who believes. Everything is possible for the one who believes. So here's Jesus. Look at this guy saying, dude, do you know who you're talking to? Do you know who I am? I breathed the breath of life into you. You know that DNA inside you? I wrote that. And you're asking me if I can? See, here's the deal, church. When our giving aligns our hearts with the giving heart of God, then miracles happen. The Bible says if God is with us, who can be against us? There isn't a bigger issue. There isn't a bigger force. There isn't a bigger problem out there than God. So next week is Commitment Sunday. If you call Shiloh your church home, we're asking you to spend some time this week prayerfully considering what would it look like for me to make a financial commitment to Shiloh Church in 2017. If you're just visiting here today, I just want you to know I'm really glad that you're here. So glad you're here. Even on the Sunday where we're talking about money and you're like, oh, Lord, they're talking about money. I'm glad you're here because I want you to know we do talk about money. We talk about sex. We talk about politics. We talk about all kinds of things because Jesus talked about them. And so today I want to invite you to prayerfully consider filling one of these out if you call Shiloh Church your church home. We'll be collecting them during service next week. And so we'll have them here for you. If you forget yours, you can also fill them out online if you'd like. I also want you to know that Pastor Brent is going to be out there in the gathering space. If you've not filled out your survey yet, he's got like 6 iPads that you can fill it out right here on the spot. So if you need some help doing that, we got some folks who can help you with that. Church, I love you because Jesus loves you. God bless you, and go in peace.